Most leaders say they value creativity and want innovation. But what happens the moment something fails? How do they react? Think about the last failure your team experienced. Be honest. Did it spark learning or did it spark blame? Because in that moment, what happened may explain exactly how innovative your culture really is. It's easy to value something when it's going smoothly. Hey, we love innovation when everything's going well, when everything's on track. But let's be honest. Do we really want breakthrough ideas, or do we just like how they look on our strategy slides? Are we really willing to accept the consequences and the costs of being innovative and iterative? Or do we just want things to go smoothly? Because the last failure on your team didn't just reveal what went wrong, it revealed your leadership, your culture, and whether failure is punished or leveraged. Today's conversation is about leadership behaviors that determine whether failure becomes a ceiling or a breakthrough.
And this is going to be a good topic. I have more than my share of failures to talk about. I don't know about you, Jeff, but I think we got some rich, fertile ground from the history books here for me.
I think so.
Hey, welcome everybody to Imperfect, Better After Broken. This is the show where we celebrate the cracks, the scars, and the stories that make us stronger. I'm Susan Hendrich.
And I'm Jeff Servello.
Here on Sandcastle Radio, America's hottest online variety and music station, coming to you this week on Easter Sunday to talk about the stability myth, when failure can be a great teacher.
Does your organization walk the walk? Let's do it. Let's be innovative. But how do they respond when the cards are dealt? Are they going to step up, or do their actions reinforce different behaviors?
Why would an organization have a mission or a goal of being innovative, but then when the innovative behaviors or activities or ideas are brought up, they get shut down? Why would anybody have that incongruent kind of approach?
This boils down to, what's your event horizon? What's your lookout? Are you willing to look out and really invest in behaviors and practices that are going to set yourself up for the 3 to 5 year mark? Or are you stuck responding to quarterly earnings statements, yearly statements? Are you willing to truly invest and let things kind of play out? Or are you constantly reacting to short-term indicators? I think that's where people get into trouble with when it comes to innovation and failure.
So that's what you mean when you say that failure isn't the opposite of innovation, it's the fuel. The failure, therefore, is an investment, like you're saying. And I think it was Thomas Edison who said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's the investment piece, rather than looking at that as a miss, a loss, a failure, a setback. That really is a spring forward toward your goal.
How are we defining innovating? Are we expecting to get it right the first time? Is that truly innovative? Or are we really acknowledging the design and testing and refinement process? Think about the Wright brothers. How many times did they redesign, rebuild, retest the Wright Flyer? They didn't get it right the first time out the gate. It was an iterative process. So the goal wasn't, we'll get it right by Tuesday, we'll get it right the first time out the door. The goal was, we're going to fly. We're going to see if manned flight is possible. I think the definition is the starting point of any great innovative process. And with a poor definition, I think you set the stage for poor outcomes.
Was it you that told me that the Wright brothers were so prepared to fail and saw that as such part of the process that they would bring the cleanup damage kit with them, knowing that they were most likely not going to make it that specific day, but keep going?
They planned for it. It was built into the process. These are the things we think are going to go wrong. When this goes wrong, this is what we're planning to do. It wasn't, oh, it's going to go right, and then there was no contingencies. This is what military planners would refer to as branches and sequels. If it goes right, we're going to do this. If it branches off, this is how we'll respond and how we'll iterate and how we'll continue to flow, instead of, oh, didn't work, we're done.
When you said branch, that created an image in my mind how trees work. As each new branch is created, it finds its way toward the sun. 2 nights ago, when Artemis launched, it was so exciting. And I will admit that I was brought back in time on a visceral level to another launch that didn't go well. And I remember being in school and all the kids and all the teachers, we were all gathered around televisions to watch together. And when we lost the Challenger, who knew that that would become one of the most instructive business scenarios of all time? O-rings and speak up, and are people really open to hearing about risks? When Artemis was getting ready to launch, it really took me back to when Tom used to work at Cape Canaveral and watch all the launches. And when there's a manned group in flight for the moon, I was so hoping, and thank goodness we have had such a lovely outcome, but we get afraid from past mistakes, past failures, past times when things don't go well. And does that stop us from trying again to go to the moon 50 years later? No, said the US, we're going for it. So I was proud to be an American yesterday watching us do it again.
I love that you brought up Challenger and Artemis. It reminds me of that scene from Apollo 13 where Jim Lovell's wife was talking about they're going to the moon and people are acting like this is an everyday event. The normalization of extraordinary behaviors, or in the case of the Challenger, the normalization of deviance. Well, the tolerance is 2 feet. So it's really 6 inches, but we've built in this margin so we can erode it. But again, the thing that I really appreciated about the Artemis launch was everybody's appreciation for the risk and how special it is. I mean, I remember sitting in first grade watching the Challenger launch, and we had the benefit, because I grew up in Southern Maryland where the United States Navy's test pilot school is. And one of the crew members who passed that day came and spoke to my first grade class.
Wow.
We had that event, and one of my next door neighbors actually was an astronaut, and I got to go down and watch one of his launches when I was in high school. Totally rad experience. We got to a point where people going into space was normalized. It was no longer special. To tie this into innovation, when we lose sight of the magnitude of what we're trying to accomplish, I think we also lose the plot on the risk, the reward, the cost, the process, to where organizations fail and innovation fails, not necessarily because people are making mistakes, but because organizations make failure feel unsafe. We couldn't speak up about Challenger because we had to launch. We said we were going to do it. We have to do it by this date. Think about when Elon Musk rolled out the Cybertruck and they shot the ball bearing because it was supposed to be like bulletproof.
Oh, yes.
Did he fail, or did he pivot real quickly and make that a watershed moment for the Cybertruck?
How relevant is that to our own lives? By the way, how cool that you grew up getting to have that kind of experience. I'm kind of starstruck imagining an astronaut coming into our class. By the way, did you say rad experience? Did I hear
I
that?
may have.
Yes, that's pretty awesome. I know. I think it's just like perfectly timed because of the era that we're talking about. Looking at fostering safe environments for failure. Innovation doesn't fail because people make mistakes, but because organizations make failure unsafe. How do we make failure safe? May I tell you an embarrassing story? One of my first learnings about failure. In the 80s, I worked for one of my father's junior chemists. My dad is a research chemist, and he's invented many things that we all use today. I grew up seeing him have success and, oh, got another patent, yay. And to your point about not celebrating, it was like, oh, cool. It's like I brought home McDonald's, like not really. So I march in there and I'm going to be just as good as dad, of course, because I got the white coat and I've got the autoclave and I'm mixing the chemicals. And he gave me the experiment that I was to do. He gave me the substrates and the conditions, and I had my notebook out and I was writing, and I put all of the materials together and I executed on the process. And I'm pretty meticulous, pretty careful. And I'm thinking, cool, this is going to be great. Put it in the autoclave, spin for a couple of days. We come in and it didn't work. oh man, on my first try, I don't have a patent. This is terrible, right? Like I don't know how, but I had somehow expected that I was going to go in there and be just like dad. And, well, just like dad, how many thousands of times did he run an experiment in a day and it didn't work? But I didn't know that at the time. So I go to my boss, tail between, I'm so nervous. I said, it didn't run and it didn't stick. And he said, okay, cool, let's do this. And he just kind of went on about his business. And I was ready for either being fired, told I was a loser, I was never going to make it in the sciences, or like some other catastrophic thing. And when we talked about it at home, I asked my dad, well, how many times have you failed? He said, I can't count how many in a week. But I never heard him talk about a failure at work. And it wasn't because he was embarrassed about them. It was because it was such a normal part of existence. As Thomas Edison said, 10,000 ways that it doesn't work, knowing that if I keep at it, I will get to that one time that it does work, and that makes it all worth it.
I think that's incredible. I can't stand the word failure, and I don't necessarily care for the word mistake. It's one thing to say there was a system failure, a material failure, things fail. But when you are purposely exploring the fringe, they're on this mission to learn what's going to work and what's not going to work. So therefore, by design, it sounds like to me, there are things that they are testing the limits of. Think about the opening to Top Gun 2, where the test parameter was Maverick just had to get to like Mach 9 or whatever. And he has that little grin and then boop, a little further. That was outside the test parameters. He was pushing the envelope. How do you find the edge? By exploring the limit. We lose that sometimes when we're trying to be innovative. What's your thought on aligning on a definition of what innovative is as part of that process?
Okay, painting the picture of the fringes and testing and going out there with a learning mindset or a growth mindset. When I think of innovation, I think of new ways, novel, new, trying new things. And it's a verb to innovate, try something new. That does not have any definitional inclusion of success, failure, there's no measurement that's attached to the term innovate, but somehow we only look at the end result. We only watch the documentaries that show how these people are amazing and how they got their Grammy or how they got their perfection. But actually, the people that we truly fall in love with and follow are the ones who come from unlikely stories because they have failed, or their environment failed them, or their system failed them, or they themselves didn't have their head in the direction that they need to go. So defining innovation is about trying something new. How would you define it?
Innovation is the purposeful exploration and testing of limits.
You've got to know what the limit is if you're going to be able to test it. Mach 9, 440, 3 classes in a semester. So you start with the limits and then push those limits. On the other side of my pain lies my purpose.
Ooh.
And so whenever he gets to that edge where it's like too much, I can't take it, I can't go one more step, I can't persist with this amount of failure, he knowingly says, right on the other side of this exhaustion, of this last, I can't make it anymore, might be the winning step. So I'm just going to take one more. And I love the concept of those increments. As you find the limit, you test and stretch, take a breath, you test and stretch, and you keep going. And that's why the 4-minute mile that was broken was such a big deal back then. Now, how many people have broken a 4-minute mile? But it was news then because it was a previous limit. The Winter Olympics, similarly, constantly innovate. What's next after AI? What is the limit? And then how do you purposefully go beyond it? So I like your definition.
I would suspect that there's probably a blending of the two. Leaders would do well, or organizations would do well, to really think about, what are you trying to accomplish? When we say, let's be innovative, the very next question that should be asked, to what outcome? What is it we're trying to innovate? Is it we're trying to get from the 5-minute mile to the 4-minute mile? Is it we're trying to invent a brighter burning light bulb, create a cure for cancer? Or what is it we're trying to accomplish? And in being very, very specific, iterating or moving towards it. Go back to the Wright brothers. First in flight. How long were they in the sky for?
Seconds.
Seconds. If my flight to Wilmington in a couple of weeks is only in the air for seconds,
We're
we've got problems.
a
Good enough
great
to
point.
get them into the Smithsonian, onto license plates, into history books, because they were deliberate in defining what success looked like as part of an iterative process. Companies overlooking, whether it's deliberately or indeliberately, whether they do it on purpose or not, by not really aligning on an outcome, and they set the stage for people to then have differing opinions of what success looks like as part of the innovation process. And I think that then leads to the judgment of you failed, wag your finger, as opposed to I've come up with 99 ways not to create a light bulb.
Why wouldn't a company truly set those targets? You remind me of Kodak. Kodak invented the first digital camera, not
Yeah.
Sony, not Nikon, that we now know in the digital industry. It was Kodak. It was in 1975. And here they have this groundbreaking material that now become, what everybody has in their pocket is a digital camera. But leadership suppressed that invention because it threatened their film business. How blockbuster video is that? Yeah, let's protect this. And lo and behold, the magic of innovation is that it eventually gets out. So own it, drive it, and take the risk, overcome the fear, or somebody else will figure it out.
And I think fear is exactly it. Fear of a loss of identity, a fear and a loss of market share, a fear and judgment. What are the things that keep people from moving? To your point about a fixed versus a growth mindset, people with a growth mindset know that it's going to get dirty and sticky and messy. It's the journey, not the destination, people. A big part of it is the fear. And then being able then to say, recognizing that this fear is weird, how can I fail better? What do we do? And I think that comes down to identifying what are the preventable failures? What are the things that are within our control? What are the things that are going to be complex failures? System integration, processes. And what are the things that we're pushing to the point of failure so that we can get to that fringe and maybe move it beyond? And I would term those as intelligent failures. What are the things we're trying to push to the point of failure? We do these things on ships. We would do a pull test on a line. The line should be able to handle X amount of weight. Test it to a certain point to make sure that it was usable. Or the cord that would lift the small boat out of the water, it would be tested to 1.5 times the weight of the boat. So to make sure, okay, if it can do this, then we're confident that it can do that, right? But we're testing for an intelligent failure, right? We're testing that margin. I think that going into it, knowing and defining the terms goes a long way.
I saw very similar things in aerospace where cascading failures, O-rings was an example of that, where it wasn't just one failure. Usually it's an accumulation over time of either neglect, fear, or poor judgment, one of those three, if it's a human error. And those accumulate just enough so that the catastrophe conditions are created. And how many times are we skating on the edge of a catastrophe? We don't even know it. You ever hear about house fires? Oh, it was faulty wiring. Well, that faulty wiring was probably there for over 50 years, but it took just the right set of conditions. But if we don't test those limits, to your point, to find out just how far, then we are unable to go and stretch beyond them, nor are we able to live near those limits. On your car speedometer, there is a lot more room to go fast than any speed limit you'll find in the US. Autobahn, maybe they can go all the way. There's a reason why the capability is more, even though the limit as defined is less. So that definition of what is the limit should change with a growth mindset. As you stretch, as you grow, try something new, fail or succeed, you can't go backwards from insight and knowledge, constantly moving forward. I like failing more in my later half of my career here. I don't fear it in the same way. I kind of get excited about the thought of, well, we figured out that didn't quite work. It's a bit of a camaraderie building if we can stay with it and if we can keep from the blaming part. I like the alchemy and the experimentation. When did you become comfortable in a growth mindset yourself?
I'm still working on it. Probably by default, I'm a fixed mindset person. Through my recognition of my proclivity or tendency to a fixed mindset, that then I make constant efforts to get into a growth mindset. When something goes wrong, instead of being like, oh, why did this happen to me? How can I use this? What's the lesson here? What can I do with this information? How can I make this purposeful instead of it to, I'm going to steal your phrase here. Everybody, this is a Susan phrase. Instead of why is this happening to me? How can I use this as how is this happening for me? That becomes beneficial. And so then I want to ask you a question then as a scientist. How does gathering and examining data post-event help to drive a growth mindset?
I love that question. And you're bringing up in the business world, also applicable in law on the battlefield, post-mortem is our best way. History will repeat itself until learned. How does post-mortem or after action review allow us to enhance our growth mindset? If we are here to perform an after action review, by definition, we are not dead. We made it. And that's a blessing in itself. So starting with the fact that catastrophe is a relative term, and most of the time in an iterative sense, when you're looking backwards, would you do something differently? Of course you would. But you now have the benefit of that knowledge. Maya Angelou said one of my favorite quotes, when you know better, you do better. And what that tells your body, your mind, and the people around you is, had I known back then that texting and driving or whatever the mistake you did back then, now we know. Doctors used to smoke on television with their patients in the room. We all know better now, but sometimes that fixed mindset shuts down innovation because we have a lot at stake. R.J. Reynolds had a lot at stake, and that's why they hired the doctors to show that smoking, it calms you down or it does all these things. But when we know better, we do better. And most of the newsworthy stories of waiting to are based on we knew better, but we didn't do better. So as a human, I would say that the gift you give yourself when you fail is to immediately say, what do I now know better so that I can go better toward my future?
And I love that you brought up postmortems. And a couple years ago, I discovered and began to implement pre-mortems, where I would sit my team down and say, okay, whatever our timeline is, let's say we're post-event and we failed catastrophically. What didn't we account for that we could have accounted for? To your point, to Maya Angelou's quote, right? If we know better, we can do better. So let's kind of, okay, if it's going to go wrong, what are the most likely culprits so that we can try to plan those things out of the equation or minimize the likelihood of those things popping up? And I think a pre-mortem tool is so underutilized for the silliest of reasons. People don't want to carve out the time to plan ahead of time. We're going to be innovative. We're going to experiment. Great. What are we going to do? I don't know. We'll figure it out as we go. And then they're surprised when it goes wrong instead of taking the time ahead of time to plan, bound the experiment, to identify what it is they're testing or where things could go wrong ahead of time.
You're really bringing to light the importance of purposeful behavior, intentional thinking. I really didn't make that connection. We were getting ready for today. I didn't catch the gravity of how important purposeful, intentional, directional thinking and action is. So the pre-mortem is a sterling example of what could go wrong. And the best pre-morta, are when we allow ourselves to be ridiculous. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen with this vacation, Clark Griswold? Well, Wally World isn't open when we get there. Ha, ha, ha. Of course it'll be open. Like, if you can imagine the absurd, then when the real thing happens that is, disparate from what you thought it would be, maybe it's not as scary. Or even if it's something different or even worse, when you can get your neural pathways dug to say, something could go wrong, let's plan for it and remember that we're likely to survive it, whatever it is. And we humans are, for the most part, equipped to adapt, be resilient, and sometimes have even better outcomes after failure. Remember the title of our show, Imperfect, Better After Broken. Not just flailing along and surviving and putting ourselves back together enough to keep moving. Better after broken.
Yeah, and I think that requires intentionality, both ahead of time and on the back end, right? There's an old saying, the 7 Ps. Are you familiar with the 7 Ps?
Proper planning.
Proper prior planning prevents pathetically poor performance. I made it G-rated for the radio because I'm still learning.
Thank you for the pathetic.
Yeah, yeah. But it speaks to, right? We're going to be intentional about what we're trying to accomplish and plan for it. And then on the backside, though, what are we doing with what we learned along the way? And I think that's the other thing. I worked at a company one time where they said, we don't have a data collection problem. We have a data analysis problem. We have all kinds of data. Nobody takes any time to look at it.
Mm.
And so, if Edison, when he was doing the light bulbs, just would have been like, I'm going to get through 99 different filaments, but never looked at which ones lasted the longer, which ones were the brightest, which ones were efficient, whatever. Would he have been innovative, or would he have just been productive?
Watching tape. Penn State soccer, 1980-ish. Coach Denny would have us play without, sometimes he'd just have us out on the field and just scrimmaging and hanging out, and he would film. And then we would go back and we would sit and watch the film. I hated watching myself on film in the beginning because I was like, I thought I was gliding through the air and, like poetry in motion. And you'd watch yourself and say, I can't believe I didn't trap before I shot, or I didn't, just the simplest things that you should be doing. But there's something about watching tape. You and I do that when it comes to our show. We say, okay, next time, I want to make sure we introduce something sooner. Like, that is how we learn. So your point about data and analysis, insight-led change is learning. And if you don't do that, the teams that didn't watch their tape keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And whether it's out of lack of planning, laziness, fear, not wanting to see how ridiculous you look, we miss out on a chance to have this feedback loop and this system of making ourselves better. We are creating our own textbooks every time we act. And all we have to do is open them up and take a look at what happened to learn from our mistakes.
I love that. And the example of looking at game tape and being critical and having an idea of what we wanted to have happen, and then examining how did we implement towards that, and then where did we drift, or where were we successful, and documenting that and adjusting course, I think, is powerful. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
How do you personally define failure? And what impact has that definition had on how you've moved through your career?
So the first thing that came to my mind when you asked that question was missing out on meeting expectations. And I got sad as soon as I thought that, because how many times are my expectations fair? How many times am I ascribing other people's view of my worth, my success, my value? I'm like looking to the outside world to decide whether. So why I'm sad is unfair expectations, unreasonable, standards for oneself create a lot of false positives, meaning failures that aren't perhaps really failures. So I'm kind of sad when I think about my definition. I think I want to change it. What's your definition?
For the longest time, it was not winning. And then I realized I was doing a terrible job of defining what success looked like. So then more often than not, I felt like I was failing because I didn't feel like I didn't have anything empirical to assess against whether or not I was winning.
Where'd you learn that? Where did you learn that if I don't win, I fail?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it was experience of being, I don't know, I was kind of a misfit as a kid, and I was always somebody professionally who pushed the limits, right? Like if you told me I had 6 feet of rope, I was gonna, okay, could I get 6.5 out of your hand? Like, what is it that how could I push the edge? And so then it was a lot of hand slapping, and then so it was like, but very rarely was I defining what winning was. So then a lot of it too, I found was not empirically driven, but how did I feel today? Well, I don't feel like I did a good job today.
Mm.
I don't feel like I drove the ship as well as I could have. I don't feel like that was a great coaching session, but I didn't have a standard I was judging against. It was more my gut. Maybe it was just I ate a bad sandwich, but that now I'm, so
Yeah. I think I'm the same. When I asked you that question of where did you learn it, and your response, my answer is exactly the same. Most of my harshest raters are my left and right hemisphere of my brain, right? About there's a saying in leadership, when someone has a very high sense of personal accountability. Listen, no one can be harder on you than you are on yourself. So I'm not going to pile on to that. I'm going to encourage you to take the hit and bounce and get right back up again, because you have a lot of good to do in this world. And that one setback will not define you unless you allow it to. So I say that now, and it sounds really like leadershipy and, guru-y. But I definitely, as a child, remember I had to win, not over others, but I had to be able to do my best. So a 97 on a test meant 3 things wrong. What is that perfectionism? Can we talk about perfectionism and failure and how they relate to each other?
Yeah, I would love to. I think about that, and I don't know. My entire professional career was driven by a zero defect mentality. You have to get it right.
Okay.
Right? You have to get it right. What happens if you get it wrong? Don't. I've never done that before. Figure it out. Training evolutions. That didn't go well. What did we learn? Doesn't matter what you learned. You didn't get it right. And trying to fight back. Well, then why are we training, right? Football practice, we would practice. We dropped the ball. What did we learn? Don't drop the ball. Or have your hands like this when you do the handoff, or something, right? So there was that mentality. And I think that the perfectionism really crushes the spirit to learn, to grow, to be curious. It's very judgment driven, which judgment, I think, then leads to fear. What are your thoughts?
I dig that greatly. My coach once said to me, perfectionism is a choice to live in fear and a guarantee of disappointment. So she said the opposite of failure is not perfection. The opposite of failure is being willing to learn, is the opposite of failure. So, embracing that. You bring me back to one of those learning moments where, when you're a kid, you don't really understand metaphors and all that much. So I remember playing softball. I had to be 8 years old, and I was a slug. I had a good swing, but I was in a little slump. And I hear my dad from the stands, choke up. And I'm like, why does he want me to cry? This is ridiculous. I'm not going to cry out here. But he's trying. So he comes over and he helps me, and he shows, if you're too far down on the bat, and that's why you're undercutting. But the moment of being open, I was so rigid in my thinking and so rejecting of this thought, like, why would you, I'm not supposed to cry out here, that I missed the moment of, and then when he moved my little hands up the bat to make the difference, and then got out of the way and allowed me to try it again, thwack, right? I'm back on base. But letting yourself laugh at yourself when I took myself really seriously that day, and I got all caught up in nuance and meaning instead of just allowing myself to be reformed, literally, do a different form on the bat. So I'm trying really hard in my life now to afford grace, not only to myself, but to everyone around me as they are learning to choke up on the bat or figure out their way through their challenges.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think you make a great point with, there's this timeless tale of do this well. And then when it doesn't pan out, people's spirits get crushed.
Mm.
But how much more empowering is it when you create space and invite people to learn and reflect and grow, as opposed to the easy, judgmental, fear-inducing thing of crushing their spirits?
Yeah. How many spirits get crushed out there? How many little minds, little hands, as they're growing up, decide to recoil and avoid that embarrassment again? There has to be a point for children where many kids, they'll try anything, scribble outside of the lines, and at some point we learn to become more and more inside the lines and more inside the box. And I get that there are rules and there are lines and there are things that we have to adhere to in order to have a safe and social society. But I think we take that a little bit too far, and we sanitize and perfectionize, if that's a word, ourselves out of experimentation mode.
Yeah. How much more sad is it that there are adults that do that to other adults who, having experienced that as kids and in the workplace, do the same thing? I had a moment. I'm going to tell a quick story, and then we're going to go to our listener question here in a second. I worked for a guy when I was stationed in Bahrain. Charming fellow. And he was watching us do some stuff on the ship, and we didn't do this thing particularly well. And I knew it. He knew I knew it. Didn't say anything. We finished the evolution. We come back in, and he's like, "What'd you learn today?" And I told him, and he's like, "Yep. That about covers it. Don't ever do that again." But this is a guy who did a lot of finger wagging, but in that moment, he created space for me to learn and become a better version of myself. And I think the same thing happens when you're trying to innovate, right? He could have led through fear in that moment and made me smaller. But by creating space, he gave me space to grow and encouraged me to be a better person and a better professional. And I so appreciated that. And I've gotten that wrong more times. Like now, as we're talking about, like, ugh. Sometimes I got it right, but I got it wrong a lot too. And I think it comes back to fear. The fear of a deadline, the fear of a budget, the fear of, right? Then it drives, that fear is like a domino.
Mm. What a gift he gave you in that moment. And especially that fact that he wasn't always allowing space to experiment, how meaningful that moment is for you to remember it to this day and say that self-coaching I was allowed to do was more meaningful than somebody from the outside. We spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for our entire lives with ourselves and a running ticker tape. There's a constant radio channel in our head. How intentional are we about the things that we say to ourselves?
That's incredible, right? I mean, I don't think we are. I saw something the other day that said, if you wouldn't say it to your friend, why would you say it to yourself?
Mm.
And Bruce Lee has a quote that talks about, use kind words with yourself. Your mind can't tell the difference, whether it's coming from you or from somebody else.
You're reminding me of one of my favorite verses from the Bible, and I want to get it right. Isaiah 43, 18, 19. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Feel the freshness in that sentence of move on, right?
I love that. I love that. I think that
So what
that
does
is.
our listener have? I'm sorry, what is our listener asking? I'm excited about this question.
So our question today comes from a listener in Tampa, Florida. And what they're asking is, I'm trying hard to create a growth mindset in my team so we can keep a positive attitude and to shed our aversion to risk and learn how to grow and evolve. However, my boss, and I suspect their boss as well, leads with a heavy hand and seeks to punish every shortcoming. What can I do as a leader to maintain, or dare I say, enhance the psychological safety within my team when my boss treats every failure as catastrophic?
That hits hard in this world of chaos and stress, and where psychological safety is not a guarantee. I think this person is showing the growth mindset already, that they even want to try to create that environment, even if above and around them it isn't safe. So there's that notion of, if it is to be, it is up to me. And what you're describing right now, I liken to a concept in psychology called generational transmission, multi-generational transmission. The sins of of generations before. We tend to repeat patterns and cycles because familiar is preferable to the brain over that which is unfamiliar, even if it is painful. So this individual who's asked this question, be proud that you are seeking to break a multi-generational, in the workplace, multi-generational transmission of, well, this is what I go through. Everything is a heavy hand and punishing shortcomings in me. So I'm going to pass that forward. I had a professor in graduate school, and I thought he was joking when he said this. He said, I had to suffer humiliation with my doctoral thesis and the questions that were asked of me. So get ready. And I remember where we were sitting in that class, I swore he was kidding. Like, he can't possibly be serious that I'm going to intentionally make your experience painful because I had to go through it. Thank you, listener, for saying something different and saying, I want to create a growth mindset in my team. How beautiful that they already have that mindset to even say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you were talking about your professor, I started shaking my head because I knew exactly where you were going. That idea of, if it worked, it made me successful, it'll be great for you. I would offer our listener a couple things based on some of the things we've talked about. First, I like this visual image of a leader they talk about stuff rolling downhill. So what's your umbrella that you can put up to shelter your team as best you can? And you may not be able to control the attitude that your boss is bringing to the situation, but you can shape and frame how your team responds still. So to our point about premortems, what are you doing ahead of time to define what success looks like? And what are we testing, investigating, and allow for contained experiments to happen? Recognize when people are where they are on their experience levels and what that means relative to performance. I would say when you do explore and investigate and look at data on the back end, how are you analyzing in a way that allows room for growth instead of blame? What assumptions did we prove? What went wrong? We thought it was going to break it this. Did it break it that or something else, right? Was it a material thing or was our assumption faulty?
Wow. Yeah.
And exploring kind of with an open heart. And then I would say, like, what are we doing with the learning To the point I made earlier, we don't have a data analysis or a data collection problem. We have a data analysis problem. What are you learning from this? And I used to tell my teams all the time, there's a difference between a lesson learned and a lesson observed.
Mm.
We watched the thing go wrong is much different than we watched it go wrong and we've adapted our processes so that it doesn't happen again. Or we've minimized the likelihood of it happening again, right? Did we learn from it or did we watch it? Two very, very different things. And so I would say control with your team the best you can. What were you saying?
I'm sorry, I got excited about your concept there of like what did you say? Lesson learned versus lesson observed. So powerful. I was thinking about the immersion. How many parents say, please don't do what and I'm trying to spare you this, the pain, the humiliation, the failure, the things and what is the kid going to do? Almost guaranteed
they're going to explore.
Right, because until I know it, feel it, and experience it for myself. So I love the concept of lesson learned versus lesson observed. And to our listener who's asked this question, remember one of the most famous quotes in the world is famous for a reason. Mahatma Gandhi said, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." That is the concept of a stick in the spokes, of not going down, it rolls downhill and allowing the same cascade of multi-generational transmission of pain, of suffering, of failure, et cetera, to land on you. So if you want to stop what's happening above, hold that umbrella, protect your people, and build the next generation of leaders who will not have that same fixed mindset where command and control is the only way to lead.
I love that, right? What a better way to show adaptation to your story about your professor. Your professor missed an opportunity to be better after broken. Clearly, that process was not something that they enjoyed. So why then perpetuate the cycle? Why not do something different or at least attempt to do something different? I worked for this wonderful gentleman. He's a 4-star admiral now. And one of the things that he was like, just try it. Check it out. If it doesn't work, we'll do something different. And I love that. And he was genuine about it, right? Like, wasn't wed to old ways because that was the old way. Let's try something. Let's explore. Just because I suffered this way doesn't mean you have to, right? It's taking the broken pieces and instead of just letting them be broke, right? How are we building it back better?
Thank you to that leader that you had the joy of working under. And now look at you paying that forward with how you lead and how you influence the leaders who are in your care under executive coaching. I have a firm belief as a leader that to future-proof your followership, in other words, if you want to ensure that people will trust you and follow you and stay with you in good times and bad, depends heavily on how you handle their failures and your own. Every single time there's a micro failure or a slip or a do better moment, you have an audience, not only with the person who made the mistake, but with yourself, and everyone around is watching, because how you treat that person, everyone will say, well, that is how I am going to be treated or how I'm going to feel. Every time something happens, it's a beautiful, they call them teachable moment. Not that you come in and lecture the person on how to do better next time. They're already lecturing themselves. They're already, doing that internal dialogue. Your job in that moment is to help them with grace and to reorient their face forward.
You know who's the master at this? Bob Ross.
Happy accidents.
Be Bob Ross, right? Happy little accident. You never saw Bob Ross get mad on a PBS show and throw his artwork on the floor or whatever the little thing with all the paint is on it, right on the ground. Like he's like, oh, you know what? Happy little accident. Let's pivot, right? Well, he just rolled with it. He learned from it. He used it. He grew it in the moment. And then what did he end up with? A gorgeous painting.
Yes, and if he had stayed in the tyranny of perfection, he might have one perfect tree, but he wouldn't have thousands and thousands of followers who became artists because of him. I want to end on a notion of improv, acting and improv. The whole basis of improv, comedy and acting is yes and. So the idea is in the live performance, no matter what your co-actor is doing on stage, yes, and they forget their lines, or they come up with something outrageous and ridiculous. You watch Whose Line Is It Anyway? Your response is yes, and you move forward. So you're not only carrying the energy of the moment forward, but you're reinforcing that the person right next to you is exactly where they're supposed to be. And that's what makes it so beautiful. So thank you for today, Jeff, allowing me to have a yes and moment with you about my own failures and inviting our listener to do the same.
I love it. What a great takeaway. And I would like to invite our listeners to keep in mind, it's not if you're going to fail, it's when you're going to fail. And what do you do with that? Do you learn from it? Do you grow from it? So this week, I want to challenge you. How can you reflect on how can you use a failure, whether it's in the past or something this week, to accelerate progress instead of using it as something to hold you in place? What's that shift to a growth mindset? What's your happy little accident this week? And how is it going to make your painting that much better?
I take that challenge. I'm really kind of excited about it. And I hope as we go into this season of renewal, and we're in Holy Week right now, and it's a really special time for me and for so many. And depending on what you follow and what you celebrate, I am really jazzed up about the thought of going into this weekend of renewal and new hope with a growth mindset to embrace the broken parts and allow ourselves to be human and move forward anyway.
Beautifully said. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us here on Imperfect, Better After Broken on Sandcastle Radio, America's hottest online variety and music station. Susan, thank you.
Jeff, you're the best. Thank you very much. This was so awesome. And look, we did it. We did it in an hour. Holy mackerel.
Let's go.